Hi, okay, this is part two of the joint venture agreement, and I'm going to explain to you specifically what's involved in this document. Now, again, you're looking to do a developmental production, whether it's at a festival or a showcase, a 99-seat theater plan, a developmental production at a regional theater, enhancing a regional theater production. Those expenses could range anywhere. You can do that show anywhere from a few $1,000s to a few $100,000, depending on the show, the level, and where you're taking it. Regardless of any of that, you're still going to need an agreement among the producers as to how you share and what the rights and responsibilities of each party are at each stage, at each level, and hopefully, once you get to that commercial production, how you're sharing the profits and the royalties. So, a joint venture agreement is maybe a 7-8 page agreement, and I'm going to go through it just briefly, the different clauses in it, the different terms, just so you get a sense of what's contained in it. First of all, we talk about what play you're producing. You're producing a new play by a new author. Who is that, etc. You're going to discuss whether you have the rights to that play and how much you've paid for that right and what the terms of that is. And that's going to be covered, those terms, in a separate agreement with the author, which we'll discuss next. So, you have a play. You know who the author is, and you're going, and you have now partners, and you've agreed to get together and form what's called a joint venture. That's like a partnership, but it's only for this one project, a joint venture. And each one of the joint venturers, each one of the partners, is going to have certain rights and responsibilities. The first thing you're going to do, though, is agree on what kind of an entity this is. Is this going to be a limited partnership, a limited liability company? Given the developmental process we're talking about, I'm going to suggest that this agreement take the form of a limited liability company, and that you're going to go to accredited investors. And that's something else you're going to want to put in here. Where is the company going to be formed? Is it going to be in New York, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, in California? Since the epicenter of the theater world is New York, New York City specifically, my suggestion is that the partnership agreements, the limited liability companies, be New York companies. It's going to talk about how much money you're going to raise, the capitalization. Are you going to raise so much to do a developmental production? How much do you think the final production is going to be? You may not know that right now, but nevertheless you want to spell out what you do know in the joint venture agreement. Then you're going to talk about where the money is going to come from. How are you going to raise this money? Are you going to bring in associate producers to help you raise this money? And if you do, whatever bonus they get, whose share is it coming from? That needs to be addressed. You're going to talk about whether this is a 50-50 deal like we spoke about before, and traditionally it is. 50% is going to go to the investors, 50% is going to go to the producers. That's net profits. Remember, all of the operating profits, each week when you make a profit, all of that goes to pay back the investors until they're recouped. But after that, you have net profits, sometimes referred to as adjusted net profits, because there are some people that will affect the total number of net profits, and we'll talk about that a little later on. How are you going to share those net profits? Maybe someone said, hey, I found this property. I should have more of an interest in it just for finding it. Maybe we shouldn't just split it in half or in thirds. Okay? Maybe there's 3 producers here. So maybe there's someone who says, I really should get a little bit more for having been the torchbearer, having championed this project before I even found you other 2 partners. Someone says, well, listen, if I raise more money than the rest of you, then I should get a little piece. And so we talk about how we set that up. And I like to use a formula where the torchbearer gets a piece, whether that's 5% or more, for having discovered the property and brought it to this point, and then a certain amount that the 3 partners, and I'm using just 3 now as a number, it could be 2, it could be 6, that they're all going to share some piece of it equally, regardless of who raises the money, because they're all working at putting this together, and then a certain piece of the profits that are going to be shared based on who brought in the money. And that seems to be a fair way to work it out, but any way you work it out is fine as long as it's spelled out in the agreement. The next piece is that you're going to open bank accounts. And where are those bank accounts going to be? At a specific bank? Who's going to control those bank accounts? Does it take all of the joint venturists to sign on it at the same time? It's a bit cumbersome. Are you going to have a general manager? And I'm one of those attorneys that really believes you need an experienced general manager to guide you through this process. Maybe at the festival level, you might be able to do it yourself, but as you move down the process, you're going to need a general manager, someone experienced in the theater. Maybe you let the general manager write checks for a certain amount, or maybe the general manager plus at least one of the producers needs to sign on it. This all needs to be worked out and agreed among the joint venturers, the producers. Who's going to make the decisions? I talked about this a little bit in the other video. Do you need unanimous approval to make decisions? Do you need all 3 of you, say, to agree? What if there's 4 of you and there's a tie? Who decides then? Sometimes we make it that if there's a tie, and it's a business decision, that we let the general manager make that decision, since they are intimately involved in the business of the production. If it's an artistic decision and it's a tie, maybe we let the director make that final decision. Regardless, how you make that decision needs to be spelled out in the agreement among the producers. You don't want to be fighting about it later. You want it to be very clear as to how you operate as joint venturers. Now, the producers also share in what's called the producer's royalty, usually 2 or 3% of the gross weekly box office receipts. That's all the money that comes into the box office every week. Not the operating profits. That's regardless of whether you've made money that week or lost money that week. The amount of money that comes in, the gross weekly box office receipts, royalties are paid on that. The author receives a royalty, the director receives a royalty, and the producers receive a royalty, usually 2 to 3%. How is that shared? Is it done the same way as the net profits are? A little piece for the torchbearer, a little piece for everybody to share together, and some based on the who brought in the money? Are you giving away some to third parties who helped you bring in the money of that royalty? All of that needs to be addressed. Sounds complicated. It's not really, once you have the pieces of the puzzle in front of you, and I would certainly help you understand all of that. The rest of it is boilerplate. Books and records, what happens if you abandon the production, does one of the partners get to continue if they want to and the other one wants to abandon, and what are the procedures for that? If there's a problem, you're going to go to arbitration to work that out, and what's that going to look like? What laws are going to apply? Is this going to be governed under New York state law? And that's pretty much the agreement. That's the joint venture agreement, and that's what you're going to want to have in place before you get started, so you know your rights and responsibilities. It's not as complicated as it may have sounded, but it all needs to be in the agreement. See you on the flip side.